From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capitol Connection.
It was a big week in national politics. President Trump was acquitted of 2 charges against him in his impeachment trial, one of obstructing Congress, the other of abusing his power. Both Illinois Senators Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin voted to convict and remove President Trump from office on both of those charges. Only one Republican joined them, Mitt Romney, voting to convict and remove President Trump from office for abusing his power to corrupt an election. The day after, President Trump declaring victory in his State of the Union address, sparking off a bitter tension between he and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But what hovered over all of that was the uncertainty of the outcome and the results of what happened 2 days prior in the Iowa caucuses, where Democrats running for president had their first-in-the-nation nominating contest. It turns out that candidates Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders were in first and second places, respectively, with a number of different metrics measuring how many delegates they got or how many overall votes they got or in those caucuses there in Iowa. But the delay in results gave an opening to Governor Pritzker and other Illinois Democrats to ask 2 questions. Why Iowa and why not Illinois? Former House Democrat Luis Arroyo signaled he intends to fight federal bribery charges, even though the FBI says it has audio recordings and bank records to prove he bribed a sitting state senator. House Republican Tim Butler says the state should ban the very sweepstakes machines Arroyo was promoting.
I've promoted legislation to ban sweepstakes machines. It's bipartisan legislation. We have about 30 co-sponsors on it right now, and I hope that we'll be able to get that out of the House and Senate this year and put it on the governor's desk so he can sign it.
And police served Speaker Madigan's office with a search warrant last week, looking for evidence related to sexual harassment allegations against former House Democrat Jack Franks. Madigan released that search warrant to the press against the instructions of the Sangamon County State's attorney.
My interest and the interest of my office throughout has been the welfare and the privacy of the victim. And our investigation proceeded at all times at the wishes of the victim.
And on Thursday, the Joint Commission on Ethics and Lobbying Reform met again to discuss conflicts of interest in politics. All 3 current and former legislative inspector generals testified and said the current laws prevent them from doing their jobs.
But the legislative inspector general cannot be beholden to a legislative ethics commission that is staffed with legislators. That just does not work. It hasn't been working, and it won't work in the future. And
joining us now is one of the former inspector generals, the legislative inspector general, Julie Porter. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
We heard some of your testimony early this week on Thursday about your view of the ethics and the job that you had as a watchdog here. First of all, you're a former federal prosecutor. You come into a role like this. What are you looking to achieve?
Well, I was hoping to do the job just as it's prescribed in the Ethics Act, to take in complaints from people who had a concern about possible misconduct by people sitting in the Illinois legislature or people on the staffs, do an independent and thorough investigation. To the extent something was not founded, to professionally close that investigation. But to the extent I found that there was misconduct, to be able to address that and hold the member accountable in the ways provided for under the statute.
And you are bound to be confidential in how you proceed. But speaking,
that's right.
So I won't ask you specifics, but just generally speaking, I imagine an office like that might field politically motivated complaints often. Did you see that? Did you sense that? And how do you filter that out?
Well, anyone sitting as the legislative inspector general must know that the members of the General Assembly are creatures of politics. They have to stand for election routinely, and it's easy to think that people may submit complaints, sometimes anonymous complaints, sometimes with their name on it, and have a political motivation. So that's always there and always something that I take into account. It doesn't mean, though, that a complaint can't be true. And so my role was to be objective in assessing what came into me and, where appropriate, to investigate those thoroughly. If a complaint was truly politically motivated and false, then my investigation should show, and often did show, that a complaint was unfounded, and that was the end of it.
And was it your intent or your understanding that you were going to be interim until there was a permanent person placed there?
Yes.
You mentioned you provided written testimony before testifying on Thursday, where and I think in your testimony you mentioned 3 different instances that you were aware of where a sitting lawmaker was accused of serious wrongdoing, and yet that was buried by the Legislative Ethics Commission. These are 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, 2 each from the House and from the Senate. And they took a look at, I believe, your report that you provided to them, and they did not publish it. Why make that a point?
I think that is a very, very important issue that must be corrected. The work of the Legislative Inspector General is confidential and should be confidential. It would not be professional or fair for an LIG to be running around communicating with the public, or anyone for that matter, about complaints that come in that have been investigated and are not founded. When, however, the LIG does a thorough investigation and finds an issue, and the level of seriousness may vary in the eye of the beholder. To me, these were investigations that I took seriously and I think were matters of great public interest. And I found that there were issues, and I founded summary reports and asked that they be published. For the Legislative Ethics Commission, comprised of 8 legislators, to have the power to say, no, we are going to just put this away and it will never see the light of day, is not only challenges the independence of the LIG, it really destroys it. Because what good is it to have an LIG who undertakes that task, performs that investigation, does the analysis, and reaches conclusions if nothing happens with it? What stops you from sharing that information? The statute holds me to confidentiality, and I take that very seriously. I don't think it does anyone any good for someone like me who is advocating for enforcing the law to disregard the law. So I will not violate my confidentiality. Interesting. But so even though we don't know who it is, and we don't know which specific of the 3 instances you may be referring to, can you say if you've encountered a crime that would be a violation of state or federal law that is currently being kept under wraps by the Ethics Commission? What I can say about that is the Ethics Act permits the Legislative Inspector General to refer possible criminal activity to criminal authorities. As someone who was in law enforcement myself, I know how much it can mess up law enforcement's investigation for some other investigator to be running around interviewing the same witnesses, and that would never be my practice. So to the extent I encountered things that I thought were potential criminal activity, those are things that I had the ability to and did refer to criminal authorities. Before we let you go, one final question. At the testimony and the hearing on Thursday, there was some discussion about this gridlock, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. If there's a Democrat caught in the crossfire of this investigation, or perhaps a Republican, maybe there's a partisan vote and 4 vote against it. That report is then never published because it was 4-4. It was tied. There wasn't a majority vote. That's the way it works right now. Do you see the vote on that? Do you know who votes to keep things public or private from your view? Yes. Was this a partisan exercise? I can't tell you that. You can't tell even the vote? I cannot talk about the confidential work of the commission. But they weren't a part of your investigation. I know, but I do feel bound by confidentiality for my participation in those proceedings. I'm not even asking you to out the party. I'm just saying, was it a partisan exercise? Look, I would love to be able to tell the public more about my work. That's why I wrote the reports that I did and put so much time and care into them, but I'm not going to break the rules that exist. I think the way to address this, if the public wants to know more about those investigations, there is the possibility to represent those to the Legislative Ethics Commission and ask them to reach a different decision. And we thank you for sharing all of that you have with us, and I think with the Chicago Tribune and with your statements of testimony. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.
Hi, Linda. Looks like you've got a prescription to fill. Any idea how much that's going to cost in there? The exact same drug that's $10 at this pharmacy is $150 at this one. GoodRx finds prices and discount coupons on every prescription. Just input the drug name and instantly find savings at virtually every pharmacy in America.
Next. What can I do for you? Here's my prescription, and I have a coupon from GoodRx. Nice price.
Stop paying too much for your prescriptions with GoodRx.
Thousands of memories will be placed on that end table. So choose one that will hold those memories longer. When you buy right, it stays right. Year after year, into the next generation. Wright's Furniture and Flooring, making you right at home.
This is the Denny's Super Slam. 2 bacon, 2 sausage, 2 eggs, hash browns, and pancakes. And now make those pancakes all you can eat for $1. That's where the duper comes in. The all-new Super Duper Slam. Just $6.99. See you at Denny's.
Nobody wants to shovel snow.
So stop and enter to win a snowblower at WCIA.com. Guess the date of the first 5-inch snowfall in Champaign or Springfield, and you could win a snowblower from Lanes Inc. or Shambana Sales.
Win a snowblower for the correct Champaign snowfall guess, courtesy of Shambana Sales, or the correct Springfield snowfall guess from Lanes Inc. Enter the Let It Snow contest at WCIA.com. Trust WCIA 3 News at 6 for a full hour of the day's local news with Paul Cicchini, Jennifer Roscoe, the most accurate weather forecast with Chief Meteorologist Kevin Lighty, and consistent coverage of local sports and your Illini Nation from Brett Behrens. A legacy of local news for over 65 years. Trust WCIA 3, your local news leader.
Keep up to date with CI Living CI On The Go app. You can watch segments about cooking, community events, contests, and more. And best of all, it's free. It's the CI On The Go app from CI Living and WCIA 30.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
3 times in 3 weeks, a breakdown in the voter registration process uncovered in Illinois. The first one relating to non-citizens allowed to vote, then underage voters, 16 years old. Then it was former inmates who were legally allowed to vote, but their names had been scrubbed from the rolls. All 3 of those separate and isolated incidents putting mounting pressure on state election authorities and on Secretary of State Jesse White to answer questions at a committee hearing on Wednesday.
We had a misstep within our office. It was fixed, and we're ready to go. I run the largest Secretary of State office in the nation, and so we have a lot of functions, and we are going to do all we can to make sure that not only do we take on the job, but we'll take on the responsibility that goes with it.
The Secretary of State's office accepted responsibility for the error. Obviously, we're impacted as well, and I think that even though the programming error that was the result that caused this was not in our system, that doesn't mean that our system is 100% perfect.
And Matt Dietrich from the State Board of Elections joins us now. He's the chief spokesman there at the State Board of Elections. Good to have you with us, Matt.
Thank you, Mark.
First, let's look at this issue of non-citizens voting, which I believe precipitated this hearing earlier this week. Give us the breakdown now. We know at least one non-citizen voted in Champaign. It started off with a higher number. At first it was 19, and then we realized, well, that was several ballots. It was just 16 people. And then I think 9 of them turned out to have previously said they were citizens.
Right.
So this number is whittling smaller and smaller, but there still did seem to be a very clear and glaring error in allowing people who said they were non-citizens to be registered to vote.
Sure, and just to review for anybody who hasn't been following this, what had happened was in the early voting that began on July 2nd, 2018, there was a process by which when someone first begins the automatic voter registration at driver's license facilities, they're first asked 2 questions. Number 1, are you a U.S. citizen? They have to check yes. And they have then there's a question about, are you of appropriate age to register to vote? And there are parameters for that, and they need to check yes to that, and then you would continue on and complete your regration if you answered yes.
And they're doing that on an electronic keypad,
right?
Like you might do at a cash register,
right? And basically these are just kind of a thing where, before we get started, let's make sure you're qualified. Are you a U.S. citizen? Well, if you check no on that box, the way that the program was supposed to work was the voting process shuts down right then, and your information then goes no further. That kills the voter registration end of it. But what was happening was people would check no on the citizenship question, and they would think that the registration had ceased, but their information still was being forwarded on to us through the AVR process. So we had what ended up with 545 people who had checked no on that box ended up being registered to vote in 48 different election jurisdictions around the state.
So also in the last few weeks we learned that there was not just a citizenship snafu, but also 16-year-olds who were, because when they went to get their driver's license, were also signed up or registered to vote, but those people were not, none of them actually voted, right?
That's going to change. That was just an issue where if a 16-year-old came into a licensed facility and asked, can I register to vote, they would go through the AVR process, but our system was not equipped to accept those applications. So we were receiving them and rejecting them and then notifying these 16-year-olds that you're not old enough to vote under Illinois law. You must be 17 at the time of the next primary and 18 at the next general election in order to register to vote. So what we've done now is met with the Secretary of State's office just to make sure that anyone who they register at a driver's license facility is going to be able to be accepted into our system. And in Illinois, we have our law allows you, if you're going to be 17 on the next primary and you'll be 18 at the next general, you can register to vote and you can vote in the primary.
The big question I think that many people, and maybe even employees or workers at the State Board of Elections might have right now, is that with all three of these, if you add them up, the non-citizens, the 16-year-olds, the inmates, together combined, those are thousands of people in Illinois, no small number there. One, how do we know this isn't still happening in some other area? Is there some other investigation going on to make sure that the voter rolls, the registration process is secure? And two, how confident can people be that this is all being done correctly?
Well, as soon as these mistakes were discovered, they were corrected. And we've worked with the local authorities to make sure that everyone's voting rights are protected and that anyone who should be registered to vote is registered. We also worked with them, and the Secretary of State's office notified the people who had checked the non-citizen box, had sent them letters notifying them that this had happened. Please be aware.
So in some ways, it's the system working.
That's the way we prefer to interpret it. We'd prefer that these things hadn't happened, of course, but you have to realize that these were isolated incidents. Now,
all right, Matt Dietrich, thanks for joining us. We saw what happened in Iowa with the delay, the meltdown, and the results of the Iowa caucuses. Why that's giving Governor Pritzker an opening to say, why not Illinois first? That's next with our Reporters Roundtable.
Justice is fair and equitable treatment of all people.
Bringing a sense of rightness to a wrong.
When the good guys win.
Doing the right thing.
Treating everyone fairly. The freedom to do something you want.
Having our rights protected.
Things are the way that they should be.
It makes the rest of your life go just that much better.
If you're ever hurt, we'd like to help you get justice. At Konoski-Bresny, we get your worth.
At Advanced Dental Care, we believe pretty much everyone can have a great smile. Using the most advanced technology and our years of experience, we'll give you the healthy, comfortable, and confident smile you deserve.
Visit Ask an Expert on WCIA.com.
Cold and harsh conditions can make your winters brutal. So we traveled to a test facility in Baudette, Minnesota, and pushed the Honda CR-V LX with available all-wheel drive to the absolute limit, challenging the available real-time all-wheel drive with intelligent control system, and proving why the CR-V can push you through those cold winter months. Visit your local Honda dealer to find a great deal on the CR-V at 2019kbb.com Best Buy.
Rehab, recover, and return home with the Bounce Back program offered at the Hawthorne Inn of Danville. Our physical, occupational, and speech therapists provide exceptional rehabilitative care to patients requiring therapy after an injury or hospital stay. Our Bounce Back neighborhood offers beautiful suites, private restaurant-style dining, and a home-like atmosphere.
Village, where neighbors are friends and life is carefree, simply the finest.
Join the WCIA3 sports team. Brett Behrens, Craig Choate, and Marley Weirda from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign Sports Desk for the best in local sports coverage in Central Illinois on WCIA3.
High school sports are back. Join WCIA3 in honoring our Athlete of the Week. Nominate an outstanding high school student online at WCIA.com. One boy and one girl will win a $500 scholarship.
Sponsored by Loman Ray Insurance Group.
Share your morning with us and you could win.
Take a photo of your morning, post it to WCIA.com, and you could be seen on the morning show at 9 a.m.
Each Friday, 3 lucky viewers will win a coffee mug from WCIA 3 and Carriage Crossing.
Morning Mug Club, sponsored by Carriage Crossing. You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
It was a big week in national politics. President Trump was acquitted of 2 charges against him in his impeachment trial, one of obstructing Congress, the other of abusing his power. Both Illinois Senators Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin voted to convict and remove President Trump from office on both of those charges. Only one Republican joined them, Mitt Romney, voting to convict and remove President Trump from office for abusing his power to corrupt an election. The day after, President Trump declaring victory in his State of the Union address, sparking off a bitter tension between he and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But what hovered over all of that was the uncertainty of the outcome and the results of what happened 2 days prior in the Iowa caucuses, where Democrats running for president had their first in the nation nominating contest. It turns out that candidates Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders were in first and second places, respectively, with a number of different metrics measuring how many delegates they got or how many overall votes they got or in those caucuses there in Iowa. But the delay in results gave an opening to Governor Pritzker and other Illinois Democrats to ask 2 questions. Why Iowa and why not Illinois?
Complete and total chaos.
A disaster would be an understatement.
Absolute dismay.
It's been said the Iowa caucuses don't always pick a winner, but they can pick losers. And Monday night, the biggest loser was the caucus process itself.
In a lot of ways, we probably saw the death of the Iowa caucuses last evening.
The morning after, Iowa voters seemed resigned that an old tradition could give way to a new reality.
It makes Iowa look bad, and it's probably going to be difficult for Iowa to stay as the first caucus.
The way things went last night, it might be a good thing I did it this time because they might not happen again.
Illinois Democrats take issue with more than just a delay in results or the results themselves, but rather the process and the makeup of the people in it.
Why Iowa?
Why Iowa? Why a caucus project where there's less than 200,000 people voting? And why not a state that is more reflective, not of the Democratic Party, but reflective of the country and the electorate?
Illinois is a great place to live and work, and it should have a determination in who's going to be the nominee for president, and frankly, who's going to be president.
Why not Illinois? When you look at the demographics of Illinois, we far more embody what this country looks like than almost any other state in the nation.
I can't think of a reason why not Illinois. I mean, we have everything that the nation has.
We actually have a resume of sending some of the best presidents this country has ever seen to the White House.
We've sent many presidents to the White House from Illinois. We've sent Republican presidents, we've sent Democratic presidents. If you can win here, you can kind of win anywhere.
We've been running elections for an awful long time, and I want to be clear with everybody. This state is a diverse state in so many ways, in ways that Iowa and New Hampshire are not. Our state is more representative of the United States, of the, rural, suburban, urban environments of the entire country, of the technology industry and the farming industry, the agriculture industry. We represent every aspect of the United States in Illinois, and I think it is appropriate for us to put ourselves forward as the first in the nation. If you can win in a state like Illinois, with so many different regions, so many different types of people from all over this state, if you can win in a state like this, then you're worthy of being the nominee of your party.
We turn now to our Reporters Roundtable with reporters who cover the State House each and every day. Joining us is Rebecca Anzel from Capital News, Illinois, and Dave Dahl from WTAX, the iconic radio voice that you know from around central and broader Illinois. Good to have you both with us.
Thank you.
Kind of you, Mark. Thanks.
Dave, first to you. What do you say? Why not Illinois? Governor Pritzker is running that up the flagpole these days. Could it happen?
Well, one reason why not Illinois is New Hampshire's got it, so they're supposed to be first all the time in law. And I read somewhere that I believe it's the Secretary of State in New Hampshire that has unilateral authority to set an election date. So that'd be one reason. Another reason is I'm not sure people really want to do the dead of winter thing and Christmas time thing in getting their campaigns together, petitions passed. And thirdly, I'm not sure we deserve it. I mean, just if you take a look at the bad news that's come out of Illinois, even though it may not be anybody's fault with regard to the Secretary of State and Election Board, I might let the coffee cool on that one, but, you know, the governor did not ask me, nor will he.
He didn't ask you. But you raise a lot of interesting points that I think are very practical and real hurdles. There's the timing of the calendar. There's the winter weather that you might have to endure. And then there's the whole process of just moving everyone's filing period up. All these candidates that have already griped about having this long drudgery of a campaign season that just wears on them for almost a full year practically would be prolonged even farther because you'd have to back all of it up, and then there's, you know, the uncertainty of could Iowa or could New Hampshire still preempt you by moving theirs back even farther. Races that long and that expensive do tend to benefit rich candidates.
They do. And just to Governor Pritzker's point, you know, he said that Illinois is one of the most diverse states in the nation, and so it would make more sense as opposed to the traditionally more white Iowa and New Hampshires of the country. And it's an interesting point, too.
We'll keep our eyes open on those topics and others as you continue to do a solid job reporting on the Springfield government and the happenings around state government. Thanks you both for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we're back in just a moment.
Jim and Joanne are here to pick up the same prescription. They both know the system is not on their side. They both know drug costs are out of control. But one of them is taking back control with GoodRx. Next. So while he's paying that much, even with his insurance, she's paying this much just by using GoodRx. Use GoodRx to compare prices at pharmacies in your area and stop paying too much for your prescriptions. Download the free app today and take back control.
When I was growing up, I believed in a better future.
All rise.
So I became a judge. Your Honor. We pursue the truth, no matter where it leads us.
Do what's right. That's what you tell me to do.
This should be fun. We are on the same team, going for the same goal, justice.
You're going to be one of those creative judges.
I love her. I love her. We still have a lot of work to do.
A new All Rise, Monday at 9/8 Central on CBS.
Need glasses now? We have a lens lab in every store and can make them for you in as little as 30 minutes.
2 pairs start at just $38.71, and 91% of our glasses are ready the same day. No one makes glasses faster than iMart Express.
Transitions was wonderful for us. Their promise to us to always be present and that no patient or resident passes alone was very well met. Transitions sat vigil the night my mother passed. They were there in our stead. I was very grateful for that. They were there with us. They were there when we couldn't be there. And that way I knew that my mother wouldn't be alone when she passed.
Transitions Hospice. It's about living.
Find WCIA3 closings on WCIA3 and X49, online at WCIA.com or on your smartphone with the WCIA3 News or Weather app. WCIA3 Closings, your school and business closings headquarters. Sponsored by Lands, Inc.
And that does it for us this Sunday. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll be back again next week. For Capital Connection, I'm Mark Maxwell.